I'm going to talk about one work that I made this year and that I showed at the Venice Biennale because it's the most relevant to this topic. But as Wenzel said, yeah, I work in a lot of different spaces, and this is kind of one of those. Anyway, I'm just going to jump right into it. So this is obviously stuff you've seen a lot this weekend. I have a slightly different take on it, maybe than some other people, bouncing off some of the things which artists like Trevor have kind of laid out very clearly as points of interest. So this is clearly from the Snowden Archive. Well, actually, this is of course not from the Snowden Archive. This is from the Washington Post, I think, but it's looking at a slide from the Snowden Archive. And Snowden broke just as I was invited to do the New Zealand Biennale Pavilion, and I was looking a lot at commercial tech at the time, and I still look a lot in the direction of commercial tech companies and startups, and that whole community that I was looking at became obsessed with this at the same time as my home country, New Zealand, did, because we are a part of this arrangement of surveillance groups. And there was a lot of initial focus in mid-2013 when I was planning my project and what I would do on all of these programs and what they were doing, and a realization for me personally that what I was doing was not as private as it used to be, and I'm sure we all had that kind of experience of, a different kind of understanding of what the internet meant. And but I was really, as somebody who looks a lot at the visual language of organizations and the way organizations communicate themselves to the world, I was really interested in the kind of design logic that was going on within the slides as well, and what it was kind of saying about some of the internal culture that was happening within these types of organizations. And I think a lot of the media found it really surprising, and a lot of people found it kind of surprising, this types of images that were used for various different things. And I also did, but there was kind of like also a kind of widespread chatter among the design community about how kind of bad the aesthetic was, and how it was kind of amateurish and weird and surprising, and that's something that I didn't really think was giving the material enough credence or enough kind of space, because I thought there was a lot of interesting information contained in the choice of images used in this context. So yeah, obviously this great wizard for the Mystic program, which is a phone tapping program, which Trevor and Jacob Applebaum spoke a little bit about earlier. Now, so this image, I kind of looked in this image, and it's actually kind of a collage of another image. Okay, so this is a collection of the more interesting visual kind of parts, illustrative parts of some of the documents. But yeah, so this is like, I started to look at what some of these images were and where they came from. And clearly some of them were kind of found images, like appropriated images from different parts of the internet. So this one, if you do a quick Google of Mystic Wizard, that's what you get. And this guy is like number 4 or whatever. And if you do a kind of Mystic Magician, it also comes up pretty quickly. But in the context of a lot of kind of Magic the Gathering style gaming cards, which came up to be one of the sources of appropriation that came up a number of times in these different slides. This is another slide which uses a similar kind of appropriation. So this is a slide for quantum theory, another program, and it borrows from this slide here, from a Shadow Fist, which is like a similar gaming style to Magic the Gathering. And it was gathered from this artist Roberto Campus's website, who made many drawings for this. And there's a little interview of him online talking about the appropriation of his image, which I found really interesting. But there were also things in the slides which were not appropriation, which were kind of, I guess, like original imagery created in the NSA. And I was really interested in what the artists were who were creating these images, like, what kind of figure was working on these types of images and why. This is one of the more interesting ones from a fox acid slide. Obviously you have a fox kind of dying in acid, and also this amazing spam illustration. which has quick facts about the spam, with some sadism and horse shit, I think, no, total crap in there as a part of the package. So, I mean, I was very interested in what these designers were thinking and what the kind of authorial position was. Here's another lesser known program that was released by Der Spiegel from the slide. So this is a kind of a page which shows the slide, but also, I'm just going to move around here. Also, like uniquely, this had a kind of one part that looked a lot at the images in terms of comparing an older logo with a newer logo for the same program. So here you had kind of like an aesthetic development of a logo for a program, which was, I found really interesting as well. And the more I tried to think about what I was going to do for the Venice Biennale and how I could talk about this language I found interesting but also revealing in terms of where the inspiration was coming for the internal culture of these types of organizations, the more I thought like foregrounding an authorial position for an artist and proposing the work as art would be an interesting way to try and deal with this culturally. So I did a lot of Googling around on the internet and, you know, to try and find any kind of information about these designers and who they were and what kind of context they were working within. And I came across the LinkedIn page of this guy, Darcy Court, who was the former creative director, according to his LinkedIn profile, of Defense Intelligence at the NSA for the 11 years of which a lot of these slides date from. So, you know, he kind of said that he provided concepts, illustrations, graphic designs and print publications, internet-based communications, displays to support major marketing, and complex senior-level visual communication initiatives throughout the agency and intel community. So I thought, this is a potential answer to the question of what kind of author is creating these images. And so yeah, he said, obviously, his work was instrumental in communicating the NSA mission, vision, and project. So I was like, bingo, this is a very interesting position to look at. And he had a really big profile, not only on his LinkedIn page, but also on a kind of a for hire site, like a kind of a kind of freelancing site called Behance, which is connected to Adobe. So if you have a kind of a service that you want to kind of give out, you can kind of put your portfolio on Behance and people can contact you to do jobs. And so Darcy Court had a whole lot of images that he'd done for the NSA on his website and on his Behance profile. So this example of a kind of a poster, which is kind of a training poster for counterintelligence awareness, using a kind of a knight as a visual cue to that. This amazing mouse pad design, which is not untypical of the type of work he was doing. This amazing security poster as well, and some other things which looked at managerial practices. So it was kind of interesting to see the types of illustrations he was making and the language he was using, but also like what he was illustrating. So you know, you have these kind of counterintelligence kind of security messages alongside you know, kind of boring bureaucratic things. This one here is for a kind of a pay review structure process, and this is from a very well-known management practice called the 5 team dysfunctions, that's used in not only military and state organizations, but also widely across commercial organizations. So I was kind of interested in what this revealed in general about the kind of culture within these types of organizations. And this is some more of his work. So he also did exhibition design. So the NSA has its own private museum, or public-facing museum, called the National Cryptographic Museum. And Darcy Court was doing kind of exhibition design for that, and also kind of cartoon design for that. So this is Crypto Kids, which is a little bit known on the internet, and has had some work done for it. This is kind of like, supposedly, I guess, some kind of outreach program in a way for the NSA, explaining what some of its people do there. So this guides you through, the Crypto Kids characters guide you through the history of cryptography, and talk about the different roles, like Sergeant Sam here, that different people within the agency have. And I I wanted to kind of reimagine this material, so I started to kind of make as best a kind of reenactments and kind of high-res versions of his work as a part of building something that was about this authorial position. So this is a miniature version that I built with an architectural model making company in Berlin of one of his exhibition designs that kind of sat in a display structure that I started to make out of server racks. So kind of computer containers that make up data centers. I kind of transported those and transformed them into kind of display cases of sorts, making a kind of hybrid object. Oops, there we go. This is another exhibition design that Darcy Court did about the magic of purple, which is about cryptography's role in the Japanese part of World War II and Pearl Harbor. And yeah, some more Crypto Kids things. So this is actually in the structure, putting the piece in the structure. Crypto Kids behind the little miniature design there. So that was not the only engagements I had with Darcy Court. I also engaged him in a kind of commission. So as he was a kind of gun for hire after his work at the NSA, me and the designer friend that I was working with on this project, David Benowith, contacted Darcy Court and commissioned him to do a couple of original pieces as well. And so he designed this this kind of cartoon character lizard based on his Crypto Kids style. And I blew that up and kind of put it all within this kind of logic of his work in general. Now, I wanted him to do a kind of New Zealand-themed version of the same thing, because I was doing the New Zealand Pavilion, and I thought it was relevant to connect the cultures there to the US culture, so to have the kind of official former director of the NSA doing a kind of a New Zealand illustration, to me was making that connection very clearly. This is another larger group of things that I put together from some of that material I just showed you. So you have these server racks which are kind of converted into these brightly lit display cases, and this this counterintelligence awareness display thing is alongside kind of 3D versions of some of the graphics that he did as well. So this kind of network diagram showing you how people on the field receive information from different protocols and networks, and other bureaucratic things in the middle, and again this kind of idea of counterintelligence imagery coming together to make some kind of sense of an aesthetic field here. Yeah, here's a close-up of that. So Patrick Lencioni, 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, very famous management thing that was used a lot in the late 90s and early zeros. And interestingly, another one which I really like, which is only kind of partially visible here, this is a little cartoon which shows how helpful it is when commercial tech companies collaborate with the NSA. So the various ease that it offers you when there is more collaboration from commercial tech companies. So underlying some of these themes that came out in the Snowden slides as well. This I also put in there some work that he'd done after his work for the NSA. So this is after he left. He also continued to use his language and skills to do other things. And this is a card game called Dive into Social Networking, which is a card game designed for children to educate them about the dangers of oversharing in social networks, which I thought was interesting, that the kind of same visual language that was being used within the NSA was also being used for this type of thing. And this amazing other game called Positive Press, which he also designed. So this is the case that I made celebrating him as a kind of proposition of an authorial figure for that type of aesthetic practice. Again, a kind of a server rack transformed, his signature up the side there, his LinkedIn profile, and this is the room that I put it in. So in kind of in trying to situate it within aesthetic practice and within art and within the Venice Biennale, I sought out an ideal spot for it, and the spot that I wanted to use the most was this former library in St. Mark's Square. So it's designed by Sansovino, at the height of the Venice kind of powers, and it's designed as a kind of allegory for the value of knowledge, and it's kind of a kind of allegorical building with a number of allegorical paintings by different people like Titian and Tintoretto and other people from the time, kind of looking at the value of knowledge and the value of keeping and storing knowledge. And I wanted to compare the output of this artist with the output of that period, and kind of look at the way that we image knowledge in these two different times. There's also amazing maps in that collection. So this is probably one of the most famous maps of the period. That is also in that space, called the Frau Maurer map, which is a very dense, layered presentation of all of the kind of knowledge that was present in Venice at the time when it was made. And it's about, I think, 1560 or something like that. So it has this kind of, I was thinking of this as a kind of an ancient document of intelligence, of visualizing intelligence, and putting that alongside contemporary ways of visualizing intelligence and the culture around intelligence. That's the paintings on the ceiling, so yeah, you have an idea of what goes on there. And on the walls of the space, and you get this really nice kind of mirroring of visual languages here, a philosopher looking at a book, and here Darcy Court as a figure with his tools for visualizing this material. This is another shot of that same room and that entranceway. I'd kind of made this kind of pavilion with the flags of the countries affected in the Five Eyes Alliance here. Also alongside the second commission that I gave Darcy Court that I then used in the exhibition, which was a map of New Zealand in his style, but kind of also emphasizing some of the material which Trevor and other people have looked at that came out of the Snowden slides, which is these kind of physical networks. So this is kind of like a sort of a tourist map of New Zealand with New Zealand's importance kind of heightened in the style of Darcy Court by Darcy Court, with some of these infrastructure lines, these cable lines, which are so important for this intelligence gathering, highlighted. And there's a number of other kind of puns and quotes. You have surfers, on kind of cyber surfers. They've got iPads in their hands. So some of those kind of punny language that Darcy Court used is also kind of incorporated. That brings us back to, so that was one side of the room, like really looking at his work and his practice, and the other side of the room was looking at taking moments out of those Snowden slides and kind of giving them the same 3D treatment and the same monumental treatment in the space. So this is the Poison Nut logo again, and that went, and then you have this amazing logo, which I kind of had redrawn at high res. This is Special Source Operations, which is the kind of mothership kind of sub-program for a whole bunch of some of the most controversial things that the NSA does. And I kind of made that again into this kind of 3D space inside these data racks. So you get a sense of how that sits in the space, again with these kind of philosophers gazing into this material. You can get an idea of how that kind of rhymes a bit with some of the allegorical paintings on the ceiling. Fox acid diagram integrated into that as well. So this is the way some of that room interacted with those dodgers. And we have some of these amazing Cornelli globes, which are also in there. So celestial globes of that period often had these kind of fantastic animals as part of the sky. Again, it had a nice resonance with some of the way that animals are employed in some of these logos and illustrations. This is some GCHQ logic. Some of, again, what Jacob Appelbaum was talking about. Some of the kind of psych ops tactics, these kind of that they use to kind of target people in psychological ways and gather data and kind of then blackmail people. That comes together into this type of display unit as well. Now again, what's interesting that's kind of focused on here as groups, you get these kind of magician figures which come into things a lot. So wizards and magicians are something that come up again and again. And these are historical magicians that were kind of collaborating with the military over various periods in history. And we had a kind of contemporary magician figure proposed as well, which is Teller from Penn and Teller in there. interestingly. Again, more management things. This is pop psychology used in management a lot. A blow-up tank, a group of people in a network. I mean, there's many kind of details to these things, and part of what I wanted to do is open up some of these signals and symbols and look into what they mean and where they come from. So there's little annotations on the front of all of these display cases as well, which kind of unpack what's going on in each image. This is one of the most amazing ones I found that kind of pointed a lot of the questions about what was going on in these artist roles and what these artist roles were. This is the treasure map set of slides, which is kind of like the NSA's Google Earth, which basically pinpoints a kind of map of the world based on different nodes in the network, so different devices and who is using those devices and all these kind of informations. And there, that gives you an idea of the type of thing there. But up here we have the logo for that program. Again, amazing decision making there. That is the logo for the Treasure Map program, which is from the, reminiscent to me of the T-800, the Terminator skull, which is kind of, in a kind of pop cultural context, standing in for the dangers of militarized AI. So I made this kind of, again, same type of treatment for that group of slides, and used this head of with these kind of compass points coming out, to kind of monumentalize that and ask the question, what role are these artists playing? I also kind of printed out some of the slides, and again, this kind of older imagery versus more contemporary imagery. Tried to, have this as an artistic, lineage somehow. I also took over parts of the, as another half of the pavilion, parts of the airport arrivals lounge, to kind of try and apply this kind of more historical imagery of the value of knowledge and the value of data, and tried to kind of put that at that kind of space where it's being used. So this is where international people enter Venice, and you kind of walk over these images from the ceiling of the Marciana on your way to kind of getting your data checked in the airport. And here's people kind of interacting with that over the other side there. Some nice moments there. So this is Titian's Wisdom on top of a cloud, interestingly, with the military police of the state of Italy and of Venice, walking past it, and behind here on one of the rooms which you get interrogated in if you don't kind of pass through those checks. So another kind of part of the project. A kind of performative space for the project, for me, was also very satisfyingly the Guardian's engagement with the project. So we invited Charlotte Higgins through the PR people that we were working with for the Biennale to come and look at the show in advance of it opening, and to kind of look at what I was trying to do with this project. And she came and she spent 2 hours walking through the project the day before it opened, and was really interested to try to get in touch with David Darcy Court, because up until that point I hadn't told David Darcy Court, this former creative director of the NSA, that he was kind of the star of the show in a way. And she did get in touch with him, and the interaction that they had about the project was absolutely amazing, and kind of, for me, extended it into a performative space. So Darcy Court said, he confirmed to The Guardian that he had, for example, designed the logo used internally at the NSA for the program Poison Nut. So that Poison Nut logo I showed you early on, which up until that point had kind of no attribution to the author, it was actually Darcy Court who did that, which is incredible that he kind of assumed that position. And also, he had these amazing conversations with him, and he had these great quotes. He said, I sell my work and I tend not to keep track of it. He added, I view myself as an Eskimo. They do their drawings on pieces of bone and leave them in the campsites when they're left. That's what I do. I was paid very well to do the work for Venice, and David Benowith, my partner who commissioned it from him, was great to work with. As long as I have credit for my work, I'm happy. So a very interesting position there. And she also went on to kind of probe this idea with what I wanted to kind of probe in the show itself is kind of, what is the role of artists like this, and what do they do in this project, and why do they choose particular imagery above other imagery. And he kind of he said, interestingly, my cartooning is something that they found useful, the NSA found useful from time to time. It could be a good communication tool helping to express complex information in a very simple way. And I think that's kind of the takeaway that I had from that aesthetic space, was that whether it was kind of bureaucratic processes that were very boring or technical processes which were very complex, a kind of shorthand, a kind of fun shorthand in a cartoonic style was a way to make that information actionable. So that's kind of, in a way, one possible role and why they use these types of images. So yeah, there's a little Venn diagram that I drew about the project and the way that I saw the themes interacting, but maybe now it's time to open up and maybe Peter and I can have a dialogue about this or about other things. Yeah, thank you for listening.
Cool. Thanks. Thanks, Wenzel. I guess the question, we've talked a lot about this project, but the thing that I continue to be struck by, both in this project and others, is that the sort of vastness of the unfigurability in some ways of the power that is secret. The assumption seems to be creatively that the best way to address this is simply revelation, that the way to meet this power that derives its power to a certain degree, to a great degree, from its secrecy, is just putting it on display. And so
you mean as resistance, kind of like as a...
Well, I guess that's a question, is whether it is resistance to just show it. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's. I think it is powerful to make that stuff known. I mean, to Darcy Court's sort of last quote about communicating effectively very complex things. Some of the critiques I think that people bring up against artists like yourself who are trying to engage this material is that it sketches out the kind of the topography of a very complex terrain, but it doesn't seem to take a position on it. A common critique that's brought up also in your work in general with some of the stuff that we showed that was more oriented towards corporate communications. But I guess I think it's interesting to talk a little bit about that question of resistance in relation to something that's about political resistance rather than sort of critique or resistance to a corporate situation.
Yeah, I mean, I do get this a fair bit in relation to the way that I position myself into the material I show. Is kind of people ask like, what's your stance on it? What's your do you like it or are you saying it's bad? And I try and choose a position where those questions are opened up generatively, but are not answered. And that's, for me, because the feeling of ambivalence in terms of this material is something which is very strong on a personal level for myself. So, maybe not the NSA, maybe that's a little bit slightly different in some ways not, but certainly commercial tech and the way that, large organizations behave and communicate and make decisions for the way that we are able to communicate with each other and the infrastructure in which we are able to work within. To kind of be resistant to that and to say that it's something negative, I've always found a very hard thing to do in the face of also using it and embracing it. And this kind of point of ambivalence in the face of this information is something that I think I try to kind of build into the fabric of the tone of the practice of my work and the way that things work. I don't know if that's directly talking to what you were.
Well, it is in a way. I mean, I think that in some ways for me the most critical part of the Venice project was the fact that because there's no real reverse surveillance. I mean,
right.
The Guardian aside, there's no
cute headline, but yeah.
Right. It's great in some ways as a description of part of what's happening, because really what it is using social media and publicly available information that Darcy Court himself has volunteered about his relationship to the NSA professionally and the work that he's done, and simply putting that on display.
Right.
The interesting thing, the only sort of subversive part of it for me was commissioning him.
Right.
With the secret power
right.
of an artist in the Venice Biennale, on one level commissioning a graphic artist, a commercial artist who lives outside of the art world as we know it, to make something that would be shown very expressly within one of the highest profile shows in the world. And I mean, did you eventually talk with him at some point?
Yeah. So after that Guardian conversation, we had a phone call, which was great. So he contacted my friend David Benowith, who had done the commission. So my name was left off the commission because I wanted it to be this kind of secret move, because I felt like it underpinned some of the most important material. You know, the tone of the thing. If you're looking at something and you know it's been shown without somebody's permission and positioned without somebody's permission, brings a kind of gravitas to the experience of seeing it. And I wanted to preserve that in the piece. But having the conversation with him after he's kind of known about it, it was also amazing to kind of talk to him about his work and how he saw the show and how he saw what I was doing. And he had a lot of questions in his mind about why, and I kind of tried my best to tell him why I did this kind of thing. And I also extended a invitation to him to kind of host him in Venice and take him through the show, because after the gesture of kind of having this kind of secret exchange was kind of revealed, it would also, for me, have been interesting to kind of retake him into the narrative in a way. But he declined. He said actually, declined is not quite true. He said that he would have to check with the NSA on their position of being flown over and hosted by me in relationship to the project, and then he never got back to me. But I would have really liked to do that and would have liked to engage with him on that level.
And you never heard from the NSA?
I never heard from the NSA. Yeah, no, not at all. And I just applied for a O1 here, got it. You know, that was kind of no problem. So I think, I mean, actually at another lecture that I gave recently on this project in Venice, somebody anonymously came up to me from the people that had been in the audience and said that they were in the intelligence community, and that what I had done in this context is completely trivial, and that on top of that, the whole Snowden thing was also, in the opinion of a number of people in that community, also trivial and only actually kind of like a media attention thing rather than a kind of actual factual revelatory thing. Now, I'm sure many people speaking in these last 3 days would disagree with that, but I thought it was an interesting, you know, proposition. I mean, certainly my project adds a different type of framework, a different kind of narrativizing of this type of stuff than other artist projects maybe, but the fact that, yeah, it's potentially trivial is also an interesting thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it in some ways it reminded me of Thomas Hirschhorn's work, you know, 10 years ago, at least when it was shown in the U.S. with the images of maimed bodies, you know, easily discoverable on the internet, but which were shocking to American audiences,
right?
Who are largely, you know, protected from those kinds of things or don't choose to seek them out.
Yeah, and this act of framing things is a bit kind of what I think is if there's any kind of potency to the type of strategy that was engaged in this project, and I've done in others, might be where it comes from. Because, I mean, also within the security, I did a little of learning around the process of this type of culture when I was working with it, and the idea of security through obscurity came up again and again. The idea that there's so much material in public anyhow, that kind of framing it in a different narrative is often like a very powerful thing to do, because they, you know, so much material gets released, and this is kind of the WikiLeaks problem as well, right? That it's hard to kind of pick out the poignant parts, and a lot of things which are potentially quite powerful are out there in public, but are not framed for immediate attention at all, or something like that. And I don't know what that adds to what you were trying to reflect on, but
right. I mean, I guess that's an interesting question for me. Is sort of at what point, you know, sort of reflecting and depicting that part of art that shows us things. I wonder at what point that's less powerful than enacting aspects of how it works and how it makes us feel. And I don't know the answer to that. I mean, that's something that I struggle with a lot, or at least not struggle with, but I think about a lot, is at what point, you know, we have to find ways to model the way these things actually work.
yeah.
And, you know, the sort of the lack of safety in some ways, or at least the coercion of appearance that's part of living in our kinds of societies today. Because to your point, or maybe to the intelligence community person's point, you know, some of this kind of stuff really is just, at the end of the day, you know, aesthetics. We're just showing them sort of things that look nice, that sound like something that's when the real thing is actually happening somewhere else.
Right, and it can be like a false flag, I guess, some of this material as well. And I don't know what that really means, but
right. I don't know.
I don't know, maybe we should open it up, or maybe that's enough, or I don't know.
I don't know, what time is it? Okay. Do people have questions or thoughts? Yes.
Is that a real name? D-A-R, immediately Daughters of the American Revolution.
Wait, is what
His
real?
name, D-A-R.
David Darcy Court?
Yeah.
I mean, spoke to the guy on the phone, Guardian checked it out, his phone number is real, I think it's real. I mean, that museum is also real. Yeah, it's real, as far as I understand, but I don't know what names means.
Yeah.
I did ask myself that question when we first came across that name. I was
Good.
like, is that a real position, or is that somebody that's moved away from something else and is trying to rebrand himself as a different type of person? But as far as I understand, you know, what is real, but I think that's kind of real.
Yeah, I just want to mention Venice. I think you can do more with the Venice connection. There was a Max Weber conference this week, and it made me think, what was the smallest entity that had the greatest power throughout history? And I couldn't get away from Venice, which was a city-state that wasn't even a city. They had pylons. They made it up. Of course, it's beautiful because it's Italian. But the point is, they challenged the Ottoman Empire. They had connections all around the world.
Yeah, totally. It was also the first commercial empire, right? Kind of, right? So it's also the kind of beginning of the type of empire that the U.S. is the exemplary, whatever, version of today. And I mean, you can make that story anyway. And I liked that resonance in the project, definitely. That was something that I really wanted to underline. And also this idea that Fra Mauro and other kind of people like that who were making these kind of maps and things at the time were drawing on commercial knowledge primarily for making those maps. So the way that the information came to Fra Mauro to make that map was through his relationship with people that were trading in China and trading in Africa and trading, you know. So this idea of commercial tech companies informing, you know, intelligence networks also to me was a kind of enriched kind of whatever story to tell.
There's another question here.
I enjoyed your presentation, particularly the very short reference to the maps, the Fra Mauro map and the others, which were, of course, containers of knowledge at the time. From a standpoint of today, it is interesting that, well, of interest is what they didn't show. And you were referring to the animals. If you take a lot of the maps at the time, these circular maps, a lot of times they had monsters or you know, whatever, sea monsters at the fringes, which were symbolizing the, you know, their ideas about the things they didn't know.
Right.
And if you take, you know, if you make comparison about the intelligence and I say it is interesting because there's so much they apparently don't know.
Right.
So and they fantasize about. So well, it's not much of a question or so, but it's the link between the knowledge that we have and the knowledge that we don't have and fantasize about what's beyond and pushing those boundaries. Although, as we'll learn today, there's satellites circling around the Earth. We could know so much more. There's always fantasies about, oh, we don't know, and how do these monsters look like? You know, sea lions, you know, sea monsters at one point, and whatever, bearded, or I don't know, monsters of today. So very, very brief, but very.
I mean, the
very
wizards.
nice.
I mean, that's
And the wizards
one of
and
the most
magicians
interesting things.
and-
Yeah. And the fact that kind of fantasy and gaming becomes a kind of a go-to, I guess, language tool, visual language tool that they draw on. You know, I mean, that's partly because, I mean, I'm going to make really bad generalizations now, but, you know, engineers and those types of people like me also like, I mean, I'm not an engineer, but, you know, like fantasy and that's something that exists around, you know, computer gaming. Certain themes also derive from that context. But yeah, this idea of the unknown, this idea, I mean, certainly in that British slide, which I only kind of stopped on a little bit, but the art of deception slides and this focus on a cyber magician and what could be a contemporary cyber magician for this idea of kind of conjuring. And actually they use the conjurer as well in that very famous painting in that as well. And yeah, this idea of fantasizing about maybe the unknown on the one hand, but also their roles as kind of protectors and I mean, you know, the kind of the knight, the blue-eyed knight, the blue-eyed white, by the way, knight that was kind of protecting, you know, counterintelligence. I don't know. I think there's a lot of information in the way that people draw on these things, and have been maybe drawn on in a Western context for a longer period. Yeah.
I was thinking kind of particular about the quote that you got from him. I can't remember the name of the gentleman that you engaged.
David Darcy Court, yeah.
Yeah, Dodgy Court, sorry. It's,
No problem, yeah.
But that one about how the sort of effectiveness of the communication he was trying to engage with, like how those were meant to be sort of very clear, somewhat simplistic things to add interest. And it seems to me that it's kind of something, there's a counter thing to the way that you're presenting this material, because you work with an extreme density of information.
Yes.
And overlap it to the point where it almost becomes incomprehensible.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than necessarily revealing, even though there's many revealing bits within this stuff, it actually almost in a way mirrors more the structure of the sort of thickness of the kind of like information that's being released, rather than it really does, I guess, any sort of attempt to provide further clarity. Like
Right.
what you're left with is a kind of framed object that becomes so dense you can't really read it.
Right, yeah, and I mean, I think that's a sculptural, I mean, you know, I come from a practice of art and a practice of whatever, making exhibitions. I think of myself as a kind of exhibition maker, and that kind of tension as a formal tension between large amounts of information, you know, large amounts of detail, and kind of like moments of clarity is something that I think as a formal exercise brings some of the tone to the exhibition, which I find exciting to work in. And there's obviously other kinds of practices out there and other kinds of artwork, but the tension between the kind of simplistic and the explanation, and the thinking one understands something, but then being kind of overwhelmed by the amount of material out there, that's part of what I want to communicate in these types of projects. So yeah, that's great that you had that experience.